Just hit the ground running this morning. Ugh.
For those of you tuning in going, what's going on? Everything's changing so fast.
Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
And what show is this, Eric?
This is episode number 99 of the Web Platform Podcast.
Yahoo!
We are almost at 100. And Denis Radin has joined us today. So we on the panel today, we have Justin Ribeiro.
Hello, wonderful people.
We have Leon Revel.
Hi, everybody.
Myself, Eric Isaacson. And Denis Radin, like I said, here today. He was with us for one of our earlier episodes way back, talking about reactive components, which was like, it still is, React combined with web components technology. And it was a really interesting episode with Andrew Rhoda. I learned a lot, and I started to play with a lot of different things. And now all of the specs have evolved quite a lot since then, so it should be very interesting. And you've been spending, like you said, about 4 months working on Polymer Native.
Yeah.
And it's, yeah, I mean, it's very, it looks like on GitHub that it's in its infancy. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing today? 'Cause it's been a while, and kind of what Polymer Native is all about.
Yeah, so currently I work for a company called Liberty Global, and what we do there, we create UIs and the operation system for TV set-top boxes. As currently our code base, as can imagine, the whole operation system and device is simpler than a PC, but still it's about 500,000 lines of code, and it's going to be hard if we want to move to a different platform. I mean, so the next generation of boxes could be Android or it could be iOS. So the plan is to be operation system independent and presentation independent. So that's why the company is really interested in different ways of abstracting web applications. And Polymer Native was an initiative to abstract native UIs behind web components and to make it simpler, faster, and cheaper to develop native applications. So today, if you want to develop native, you should all do Titanium, which is a bit different from HTML, CSS, and also there is React Native, which takes a lot of time to bootstrap, and you need a special knowledge of what JSX is. And yeah, so basically the idea behind Polymer Native is the reason we switched from native development to hybrid, not a hybrid, approaches which are cross-platform, is that cross-platform development is cheaper, way cheaper. And Polymer Native potentially is a switch to make development even more efficient and to make it cheaper. I'm a bit ashamed, like we want to make developers cheaper people, but no, it's not about that. It's just to give them tools which are easier to use. And yeah, the idea is to use HTML tags and CSS for creating completely native apps.
It's also, too, if you have a team that's using, that's familiar with web technologies, it is much easier to use a platform like NativeScript or React Native or Polymer Native than it is to just use straight iOS Xcode and Android Studio. I would think.
Yeah, correct. So basically, the difference is huge. If you want to hire a nice React developer or React Native developer on Upwork, it's a global freelance marketplace, it will cost you about 30 USD. But sometimes you really don't need React in your application. You just need a few pages and some interaction navigation between them. but you still want to have this smooth UI experience of using native app. And let's compare it to just HTML, CSS people who are 8 USD. So can you imagine it's a difference of 3 times or 4 times difference in price of developers? It's not only about that. If you develop Angular or going to switch to a different framework, it's also good to be closer to a native APIs of browser, like custom elements are.
I imagine a few people might think then, well, why not just build hybrid applications? But I imagine some devices don't have web views. You mentioned set-top boxes. I don't know whether do they have web views? Like obviously TVs and things, a lot of those don't have web views. So that's obviously another case for being able to build native applications in this way. Is that about right?
It's a Polymer Native aiming only application or only devices which have web views. The reason for that, it uses CSS layout and engine on browser to lay out elements. But for set-top boxes, you are correct. It's a completely different world. Everything is web view. Like, you just start up Linux system with a full screen web view, and yeah, you can drop something under the knees, but still it stays, and the API is different. So yeah.
There's a couple of things I wanted to ask about that on that note. I mean, we can go into differences of TVs and web views with that. That's actually really interesting to me, because I think we're going to be doing more of that pretty soon, because screens tend to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and smaller and smaller. So
yeah, because virtual reality is an absolutely astonishing thing as well. Like you basically can have all benefits of having huge display without having a huge display. It's only rotation of your head uses its size.
So the name Polymer Native suggested to me that it was similar to something like React Native, but it sounds like you're using some sort of web view with Polymer, because there's Polymer, which is a separate library from Google, right, for building out web components declaratively.
Sure.
But I would imagine you're using web views with that, whereas React Native would actually access the JavaScript API of that device to create native components.
It's true.
So how does it work with Polymer Native, just so we understand?
Yeah, it's a good question. It should be answered probably before everything we had yet. One more thing we are facing working with set-top boxes is a limited calculation power. So we always try to optimize for performance, and we were busy with that for the last 3 years. So got pretty a lot of experience on how to build performance web applications and hybrid applications and mobile applications like PhoneGap, because it's very similar. The way you optimize web apps is very similar from platform to platform. Mm-hmm. So, and then the discovery from recent months was that mobiles, they're not slow anymore. Like if you try to compare iPhone 3GS and iPhone 6, the difference in performance is like 50 times. So one iPhone 6 is 50 times, it's basically like 50 iPhone 3GS working together. And the thesis of Mark Zuckerberg from 2011 that web is so slow, we can't build web apps because they're slow. This thesis is completely not valid anymore, because hardware guys, electronic engineers did a great job, and the browser vendors also did a great job. So yeah, things are now way faster on the web platform now. And if you consider reasons to develop native apps, it's not about performance. It's about perception. So when user perceives that something works differently from how it used to be, he becomes angry. It's just annoying. It's matters of milliseconds. So you press a button and it works a bit differently. You expect it to splash or immediately have a feedback, but it's small differences which can disturb people. And usually when someone says, hey, these web apps are so slow, usually he speaks about these differences and about this disturbance. So the workaround for that is to use native elements. So that's basically the thing which is React Native good for. And Polymer Native takes the same approach, but as you said, it uses invisible browser. Yeah, so there are pros and cons on that.
So it is translating, right? Like you're taking a snapshot sort of the. So if you look at like React Native, one of the first things they say is, hey, replace your divs and your spans with text in your views when you sort of use React Native. And then if you look at sort of the way you're doing in Polymer Native, you're taking a snapshot of sort of what the DOM exists using WK WebView, and then you're saying, hey, I want to translate that into things that I know. So for instance, you have PN button. So PN button will translate into iOS's native button stack, and then that gives you a native button, no longer the DOM element version of that button. That iOS inherently knows how to sort of eat the performance out of that thing. Is that a safe sort of simplification of the overall thing?
Yeah, correct.
So let me get this straight. I can declare everything with like HTML with these custom elements, and then it turns into the native implementation once it gets compiled or transpiled or whatever.
Yeah, correct. You basically write HTML, you use unlimited CSS and layouting, and you can get a native app.
I am so impressed with the web components community.
So for people who are not familiar with the other similar ones, like like React Native and stuff, is there any particular benefits of using Polymer Native over those other technologies? Anything specific there?
Since there is still a web view, and so first of all, layouting model. You are free to use all kinds of layouting which are present in browsers, so you are not limited to Flexbox. Also, it's really easy to bootstrap. So for React Native, you still need some process to set up a new project, and it's all transparent steps. If you do it many times, it could be easier, but still it takes some time. Even if I experienced a React developer, so putting an index HTML, there's few lines, few tags there, is way easier. Like let's be fair, it's a different complexity.
So Leon has a project called React Router, or not React Router. That's yours. It's a Rebel Router, right? Then I think you guys are working on that together now.
Yeah.
And like if you guys wanted to, I think it's not a Polymer component. It's a web component built out with custom elements and templates. So could you incorporate that into Polymer Native? Like if I had my own component, could I just throw that in, whether it's Polymer or not?
Yeah, we currently work on that and get pretty far. So it's also a nice thing about web components. So for React, you instantiate all this artificial stuff, and you still need the process to transpile it to some objects in memory. But here you can just put some HTML tags and get a routing. It works, and you can even build HTML native apps with that. And I think moving to a Rebel router from a current one, very simple. Just currently there is a nice step. Routing is always a big problem. If Rebel router is there, saying I can focus more on components itself, not navigation stuff.
So, what parts of Polymer itself are kind of part of Polymer Native, if you know what I mean? Kind of what parts of Polymer have you used?
Yeah. So to be honest, I'm not sure. So the idea behind this naming was that if you want to build some complex apps with web components, you probably would go for Polymer because it's basically web components-based framework. But actually, you don't need Polymer to use with this repository. Just a plain web components, and on top of them you can build your application. And also you can build your application with different kind of frameworks. It only matters where you put your native text, like native button. If you put it in the backbone template, you'll get this native button in the backbone. So to be honest, I'm seriously thinking about changing the naming to HTML native.
Cool. So it means that obviously, anybody, so you can use all the different web component libraries, including like vanilla web components and stuff like that. That's the plan. That's pretty cool. I think that opens it up quite a lot nicely. Cool.
So, but how do you translate that into native? Because normally, if I wanted to translate something that was sort of in the HTML sort of DOM sphere things onto whether it was iOS or Android or whatnot, and I wanted to snapshot that DOM, I would have to write Java or Swift or C to sort of understand what that component is trying to do to try to translate that thing into the native sort of component realm. I mean, how given the sphere of web components that allow us sort of to create components that make sense to us in our applications, isn't translation sort of difficult in that regard, like going forward? Because I mean, if I take a star rating thing that sort of Eric wrote and I put in Leon's router and all these things, it doesn't inherently know you should translate this to X on the native side. It's more of it's kind of a hybridization more than anything else, I would suppose.
Yeah, it's, you can build a completely native. You can build a hybrid with that. So bridging is pretty okay. I mean, if you know, if you hook to web component lifecycle, you can more or less well reflect its state. It's also definitely you need not only lifecycle hooks but notation observer and transition events, like to have animation work. You're correct. Writing iOS implementation of these things is sometimes tricky. So for JavaScript part, it went smooth. It's definitely you only have your state and you have your position, but the model behind the scene graph of iOS and web is a bit different. And the biggest difference starts, as I said initially, when you start to work with navigation, because navigation in iOS is not just a tree. So you have some controllers. So it's a more complicated structure with MVC mix. It's not separated.
There's more projects now that are using like Swift on on the back end too, like so for web development even. So, yeah. So it should be interesting, like the tooling that we should get in the next few years, but or the next year even. And I know it's early days for Polymer Native, but one thing I was thinking was, like, are you planning on making this pluggable so that if I have a component I've built, I can write some adapter that might translate it, like Justin's saying, to make it easier for Polymer Native to understand what this translates into?
I would say currently it's not that hard to extend Polymer Native component. So on JavaScript side, it will take like 5 lines of code, and
much better than what I was thinking. So
yeah, and on the iOS side, it depends on how big your component is. So I just create a class and inherit it from Polymer Native component, and then add your meaning. There should be documentation on that. It's true, but it's not that hard.
I imagine though it's quite difficult to get the native implementation of said component, obviously depending on how difficult, how complicated the component is. But I imagine that must take a lot more work to kind of get that side of the things working, correct?
Oh yeah.
Hopefully we're building small components. I know it's definitely not easy, but we should be.
Yeah, but the only things you really need is it's a reflection of standard components on the platform, and they're pretty limited in the number. But the more complex components you can build out by composing small parts, and it works pretty well. It's okay. So
you've mentioned iOS quite a lot here. Have you got any plans to kind of extend it out to Android?
Yeah, I would like to. It's there are many things I would like to do with that. The biggest improvement you can get from there is to move away from our console tool. Probably the viable field for this project is to become a Cordova plugin. So I currently work on this project mostly on single, and you help with a Rebel router integration. But the rest requires a lot of work, and I would like to get rid of console tool, and I can do it with moving it to Cordova. So plugging in Polymer Native on native side as a Cordova plugin, and then in Cordova application you can basically use your custom tags. That's viable. So you just develop application, and in a place you need, you just put tag you need, and then in the web it stays just button, but for iOS compiled Cordova project is going to be a native button.
If you do that though, like does that turn it into like you're dependent on the web view now? So for instance, Safari's web view won't support certain types of web component-y stuff. Like you wouldn't be able to have more Chrome and Firefox technology type stuff.
Yeah, I can imagine.
You know what I'm saying though? Like does using Cordova limit your development, or should you still have the option of going native? I don't know what the answer is.
I would say if you're really interested in all fancy last web components technologies, it's really not the best field to run them on as a Safari, mobile Safari for sure. But the aim for this technology is small and medium-sized application. I mean, you can easily build them with avoiding all cutting-edge things you need to polyfill heavily, or just adding native controls. Doesn't need any shadow DOM or TER.
That's a good question, actually. If you use something like the shadow DOM in your components, obviously the shadow DOM doesn't mean anything on the native side. So does the translation just completely ignore it, or is there anything that needs to be considered there? Have you thought about that yet?
Oh, look, the nice thing is that you shouldn't you shouldn't translate every tag in an application. So you can build your layout of 100 tags, but then only button is what you want to move from web to native then. So yeah, you just translate controls and not the rest.
Okay.
When we talk about web development, like what I was saying with Safari is a lot of these types of apps that we're building now, we're starting to move more towards progressive web apps, right? We're having web apps that we want to have on the home screen now. It's starting to be more prevalent. We're having service workers. We're doing these things in there. And Safari doesn't support service worker currently, right? And so we have some problems with that particular web view for iOS, because iOS doesn't like Chrome web views. But it's that makes it frustrating, because if it did, then all the web components technologies wouldn't even have to be stubbed out. So I guess getting to my point off of this rant is that for progressive web apps, like, do you recommend using Polymer Native? Can it be done, or should it be done?
I don't see how they're connected actually. I mean, yeah, there is some connection in terms you want to develop something which is have native performance, but it's only about presentation, and Service Worker is more about working in background, loading data. So basically, yeah, if you want to build a progressive web apps and you know how to run it on iOS in a browser, why not? But also, to be honest, I think there should be some kind of Cordova polyfill for a service worker. This Cordova plugin is there. I never tried to. Yeah, but it's easy because if you have a plugins like native plugins, you can build any kind of functionality. It's push notifications, any kind of caching, and so on. I'm sure that API for WebView allows to do that. But yeah, I mean, iOS Safari is at the point where it is, and it's not something we can change.
So there is a Serviceworker plugin for Cordova iOS.
I just found it too.
That was the idea for moving whole Polymer Native to a Cordova field. There are a whole bunch of plugins for native video, WebRTC, and so on, so on, so on. Or basically, this it just adds ability to build native apps with Cordova. So like before that, Cordova apps were native, and then you can get a native UI there.
But in the land of like web views as they exist today on sort of the mobile operating system landscape, the performance is significantly better. I mean, if you look at just the shift from UI to WK on iOS, like WK gives you more APIs, it gives you better performance. You can get 60 FPS on that. If you look at what's available on Android, even going back in time, you have Crosswalk, right? We can compile back down into Crosswalk and do those sorts of things. Do we need the bridge? Like, because there's other projects out there that obviously do a lot of this bridging into sort of translate you into the native sort of stack of things where you're going to get more performance. But can we not eke out performance on the web as it exists today in those web views? I mean, having recently shipped a couple of them, my answer to that, personally is yes. I can get 60 FPS, via Cordova without the translation. But do we, is that the norm? Like, is there a need for native translation at the end of the day?
So the point here, as I already said, is that many people perceive just different behavior of controls as a bad performance. So it's not about getting 60 FPS. Modern mobile phones.
So like consistent UI is what you're talking about?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Consistent.
So people get used to operation system and controls it provides. And when they press a button and have a different delay or different animation to native, a few years ago it was not that crucial because it was new to everyone. I got an iOS phone, look, it's new fancy stuff. I don't know how to use it. So as nobody basically thought, is it my web app or native? The only thing was just don't be laggy, don't be junky, and so on. But now people really can just judge what is web and what's not based on controls behavior, not on FPS. FPS is perfect on mobile web apps, but just how button or input behaves. And I have a nice demo in Polymer Native repository. So demo is
as well as the consistent experience thing.
Yeah, exactly.
For example, when you interact with HTML inputs, like text inputs and things, the experience is actually quite different to what you would get from native inputs. The keyboard that pops up has got different bits on it and things like that. Adding native inputs instead of the HTML ones, you do get a more consistent native feeling kind of interaction with the application, and that can actually make quite a big difference. So I kind of see what you're saying there.
It's kind of unique here, though, with what you guys are doing, like with Polymer Native, that you can create these, for lack of a better term, like Ionic Cordova type of apps, using Polymer, or you could do native. So you could do both with this particular thing, it sounds like. And I didn't quite get that from the GitHub, but I think it's an interesting project.
Yeah, so there's the opportunity to mix web content and native just by substituting some buttons with native buttons on your web page, on your web app. It's a nice one. It's just gives some UX boost to web apps which are already there. So yeah, by changing a tag from button to native button, you can improve your user experience. And for web representation, for when user open the same app in just web browser, it still stays a button, so you don't need to write twice or whatever. So yeah, it's nice.
What's kind of the next thing you're going to be working on with it? Obviously, you've mentioned quite a lot of things that you'd really like to add to it and stuff. But kind of what's your plan in the immediate future on this particular project?
I would say that moving to Cordova plugin is probably number one. I would like to work on some controls, like add video, and there is no data picker. Should be there.
Oh, an easy one.
The biggest improvement is probably Cordova integration. I see that it can easily boost viability of for the whole thing.
Yeah, the date picker's an interesting. So obviously we build hybrid apps at work all the time, and one of the biggest problems we have is with the date pickers, and getting them to feel really nice, and there's often lots going on with them. So having a native date picker on top of your hybrid application, I think that would be a real big win. That'd be pretty cool. So and I imagine there's quite a lot of other controls like that as well that you could really benefit from having the native feeling interaction. That'd be really good.
Yeah, I'm looking at the commits on here too, and you have it's mostly, in fact, all of the commits are yours.
Yeah.
Have you thought about? I mean, I know you're awesome because we've had you on here before. But like, have you thought about reaching out to the Web Components community, to Google even, to see if they could help get this jump started quicker, getting docs up and getting more tests and things like that running?
Yeah, to be honest, initially my company supported me, but now said, sorry man, it's going too far. You should do a job and do some React WebGL bindings. You should. Currently, I think it's crucial to find some people who are interested in moving this forward. As any suggestions, are welcome. I would like to.
The Cordova community is pretty huge as well, so there'd be kind of a good community to reach out to.
Yeah, I mean, go to Twitter, go to Google+, Facebook, GitHub, reach out to people. I wish I had time to even help on this. This sounds really interesting.
Cool.
And it is early. It is early, so people could theoretically, shape the way that this comes out. It's not like it's an established project. These are exactly what things need to happen. Am I incorrect in that?
Yeah, correct. And also, it's a very flexible technology. I mean, it's not trying to be everything. So, small job done here can make a big impact. Like, we don't try to re-implement a layouting model, don't try to re-implement the way browser applies styling and cascades of styles and so on. So it's a bridging, and it's a way less job than, for example, React Native, which is hundreds of thousands lines of code and so on. I mean, but yeah, it's really different. But
we can probably send a link out to a demo anyway, so that everybody will get the benefit from it then.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Why don't we do that? Your most popular GitHub repository is HTML-GL, which is something I was looking into for a project last year. That particular project had tons of nodes and things that needed more than SVG because of the rendering necessities. And I was finding it really hard to find stuff that I could use for WebGL that was effective for me, since I'm not an expert. Yeah, this was really good as well, and that uses web components.
Yes, WebGL is completely different and conceptually from HTML, so it's really hard to bridge, and you need to have some basic knowledge how OpenGL style works, how GPU works to make it in an efficient way. Not that easy to bridge. If you are looking for a solution which is more or less protects you from making mistakes, it's going to be something React-based. Because they have more life cycle events, and whole mutation of component is realistic to life cycle. So,
do you think you would incorporate the HTML GL in here so that you can get cross-device implementation, since iOS 8 and earlier Androids support that. Like you could actually do everything in GL. So if you were doing like a game or something, that would make sense, or something that has lots of visuals.
But currently there is an integration. So basically, if you just put a part of HTML GL code, or if you just put any web code there, any web GL code, it will just work in a web view, and then you can make a UI around it as native by just applying some custom text to places you need. So yeah, porting your existing stuff to Polymer Native is as easy as just using it on a mobile. It's a good thing.
Yeah, we'll have to get a link to that demo because it looked very straightforward, just like you would write any normal app, except you're using that one attribute that defines if it's a native.
I mean, what have we missed about this in terms of like Polymer Native and the sort of overarching goals? I mean, it's quite a large topic. There's lots of API targets and we've talked about the two primary mobile platforms, Android and iOS. Obviously there is an increasing amount of platforms that I think a lot of people don't yet consider, that sort of Leon brought up, and with TV and sort of those things. I mean, what have we missed in this conversation? What should users know about Polymer Native at this current juncture?
Yeah, I want to get started. Let's go.
I mean, the biggest difference between React Native and Polymer Native, or between Titanium and Polymer Native, is that Polymer Native is still HTML field. So it doesn't provide you new language. It doesn't provide you new styling opportunities. It's still HTML development. And it could be native only in places you really would like it to be. So it's not the way, hey, let's make something completely different from the web. It's probably the way how to add more value and to improve UX of web applications by adding some custom tags which bridge to native, and then the story that behavior is better.
I imagine that I mean, how does one design for that? Like, in a case where you do have that mixture and you're trying to come with a fairly consistent sort of user experience, I mean, the thing about that makes, a lot of, why is the web always trying to target native? Like, that comes up a lot in a lot of conversation. One reason is, like you mentioned, is sort of the UX paradigm. It's a fairly known entity. Apple has style guidelines, even Google has style guidelines.
Yeah.
But for all those guidelines are worth, you do see some divergence, and when you start to plan where you have this hybrid sort of injection of native user experience with your existing user experience that doesn't sort of translate to that native, like how does one design for that? Because I imagine that can be quite difficult for someone coming to that platform as a first start.
Yeah.
Styling's hard enough, right?
Yeah, exactly. I would say for developer it's going to be the hardest part, but if you collaborate with people who knows, it's mostly technical things. It's not about, it's for sure you can build and you can follow Apple guidelines just by using HTML, CSS. It's not a big deal to mimic them. That's a big deal is to mimic microtransactions and micro behaviors of controls. So yeah, it could be hard. So building a jQuery data picker could be not that cool as a native data picker. So
I think too the hardware vendors, or I should say the firmware vendors for Android, like a lot of times they'll have layers upon layers that affect the UI and affect performance of because they want their consistent branding on everything. And then you have what iOS does, where it just blocks every other rendering engine. So I mean, there's these barriers that are not necessarily technical, but I mean, they ultimately become technical. They stem from political and money. I guess it all comes down to money, because it is frustrating.
Yeah.
Rant over. Sorry.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, trying to pretend to be native and not being that. There are a lot of limitations, and basically just it's the way how browser is built. It's built in different way and it's have different priority from native stream, from native thread, and So the good thing here is that we don't switch completely. So at every moment of time, we can just remove Polymer Native from dependencies, and we stay with just web app. Just native checkboxes are not there. You have web checkboxes, and price for applying that is it's very small.
Well, how would the native elements work with like accessibility and stuff? Obviously, screen readers and things, might expect the DOM to be in a certain kind of structure, and then again, I don't know enough about how it technically works, but would it be able to understand the native elements, or will it see them differently? Or what about accessibility? How does that kind of fit in with Polymer Native? Have you even thought about that yet? I know obviously it's very early days, but it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
But what kind of accessibility is there? What kind of problems? For web, it's usually a big deal. Like it's a web hardly adapted for accessibility reasons. Like many people use it, but is there such a problem for mobile? Because I can see that there could be some improvements or some guidelines of how to build accessible stuff, but it's not the same importance as web have. I would say that the whole question is coming from the big care of web developers to accessibility, and I don't think it's the same way people care about it, and the same way they treat accessibility as a big thing in mobile land.
It seems to be built into native components. Really, you don't have to worry about it as much. With web, that you have to really think about how you're defining roles, how you're defining ARIA. Do you have proper descriptions and skip links, and there's a lot to think about. So for Polymer Native, what are the plans for the future? You said you're going to do some components. We need to get some more people on this with you to help.
Let's guys, come here. Let's develop Polymer Native, and I promise you, if we do it for Android, we do Cordova, it's going to be amazing. Everybody is going to use, just because it's cheap. It's really easy to integrate, and you can get. So you are going to be lead developers. It's being paid $200 an hour. And the rest are going to be Indians just making HTML, CSS, and translating them to native applications. That is a job. It's for me personally, the biggest benefit is that I'm a web developer, and I'm really good in creating layouts and CSS and so making UIs, and applying my skills without some additional knowledge. So. And without these limitations of Flexbox only, it's a really big deal. So I can open a Notepad and create a native application in 10 minutes, just because I can create web app in 10 minutes. It's a simple one. Few buttons, few images, and few screens to navigate through. It's really could be done in half an hour. If you go for Titanium, you probably would spend a week on that. It's 3 days. So
nice.
So if people do want to contact you about kind of working on this project, is it let everybody know the best place to reach you?
So the best place is Twitter or just mail. You can find everything on GitHub account, and so welcome.
So there's only one pull request right now. So somebody wants to do a pull request on this thing.
And we know where is this?
So I'm going to be watching this. I have it watched on GitHub. So anyone listening who's interested in web components, who wants to help out with this, we've had some really interesting projects with web components lately. Talked about server-side components, industrial web components. There's been a lot. So if you want to get more involved with the community, definitely check this Polymer Native out, and we'll have a link to it in the notes. So thank you, Denis, for coming on. Your Twitter is Pixels Commander.
Yeah.
Love it, and that's who you are on GitHub as well. So it's Pixels Commander /Polymer service-native. That's -native.
Thank you for inviting me. It's nice set.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. It's been a while. So,
Yeah.
This has been episode number 99, Polymer Native. And next week we'll see you and hopefully some of the team from Edge at Microsoft. And we'll be talking about the browser and the status of what's happening on there.
So many exciting things.
Amazing.
You want to learn more about what's coming on next on the Web Platform Podcast? Follow us on Twitter at the Web Platform, or on Google Plus and YouTube at Plus the Web Platform. We also need your help in creating transcripts of the episodes and helping to create open source projects under our GitHub organization. Contact Eric Isaacson at eIsaacson
or Danny Blue at D_Blue. That's DEE_BLOO.
Thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you all next week.